Assalamualaikum waalaikumsalam. Assalamualaikum
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum waalaikumsalam.
Hello and welcome to the edition of our program Peace Be Upon You, and today we will continue our series of episodes covering the relationship between international humanitarian law and Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh. Today we are joined by Dr. Hussein Eddin Allam, lecturer of international humanitarian law. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Hussein, let's start by the principles of international humanitarian law and also summing up for what we talked about in our recent episodes.
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here on Nile TV International, highlighting this nexus or the relationship, if you like, between the international humanitarian law and the Islamic jurisprudence or the Islamic fiqh. To provide here a quick overview, or if you like, a fast panorama and a summary for our dear viewers of what we have already covered over the recent couple of episodes, I would say that we have made it very clear that the basic rule regarding Muslim, non-Muslim relations is peace, and that anything to the contrary constitutes an intervening factor, i.e. it is not the origin that regulates or governs the relations between Muslims and non-Muslims. And I'm sure now the question in the minds of many of our dear viewers, why is it important to highlight this fact? The thing is, we are talking about the relationship, or if you like, more specifically, the convergence of the rules of international humanitarian law, or the law of war, or the law of armed conflicts, with the rules, principles, understanding of the Islamic jurisprudence or the Islamic fiqh. So here we mean to highlight this proximity to both of them, and also we would like to show the fact that in the sense that we are paving the way for the upcoming topic that we will be addressing, which is the basic principles of international humanitarian law, and still also the nexus or the proximity and the convergence and the conformity of our understanding, or our current and recent understanding of these basic principles of international humanitarian law, with conformity with the understanding of the Muslim jurists, both in the classical writings, or their classical approach to these issues pertaining to the battle field or resorting to war as an exceptional case, as has been made clear, alongside with how is it is also necessary to understand in this regard, this is also the case when it comes to the contemporary Muslim jurists in this regard. So, for instance, I made it also clear that in the previous couple of episodes that both traditional and contemporary or recent Muslim jurists, they tend to agree on the fact that the basic rule regarding Muslim, non-Muslim relations is peace and nothing but peace, and that a state of war or a situation where resorting to the combative jihad is also a necessity that's exceptional. And of course we have highlighted the prerequisites for this and how this is to be conducted from an Islamic jurisprudential perspective. So here, as we are highlighting this conformity of both the international humanitarian law and the Islamic jurisprudence, it is important to show that both of them come to the understanding, or they land to the understanding that there are rules, there are basic, fundamental principles that need to be observed and respected as war is taking place or occurring or happening. So again, and in very simple terms, in light of all of this, the thing is now from Islamic jurisprudence, the basic rule regarding Muslim and non-Muslim relations is peace. Therefore, a state of war is an exceptional necessity. And still, even with such exceptional necessity, still there are principles that regulate and that govern this exceptional case of resorting to war. And we clearly see the similarity and the convergence of both IHL and Islamic jurisprudence when it comes to the understanding that we can clearly see that there are three fundamental or foundational principles that are to be observed in a state of war or as the hostilities of war are taking place, and they are the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, as well as the principle of precautions.
Sir, what is the importance of these basic principles?
Yes, thank you so much for this very important and clearly logical question, as it logically follows that the question will be is, what is the importance or what is the significance of these principles pertaining to international humanitarian law? Let me say in very clear terms that international humanitarian law is not meant to prevent wars from happening or ending wars all over the world. Yet the aim here is to strike this very careful balance between a military necessity as well as the humanitarian concerns when it comes to maintaining and observing the humanitarian concerns, i.e. mainly in this regard, respecting the human dignity and respecting the humanity of all individuals, irrespective of who started the war, the reasons for this war. So the point here is the fact that these three principles of distinction, proportionality, as well as precautions, they are complementary. All the three of them, they constitute a mechanism or a tool, if you like, of international humanitarian law that aims to reduce and minimize the cost of war, i.e. human suffering as well as losses. So, in other terms, the three principles of distinction, proportionality, and precautions, they function together in order to achieve the purpose of protecting the human dignity and minimizing the destructive effects of wars.
ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. And we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea and provided for them of the good things and preferred them over much of what we have created with preference.
Sir, what is meant by the principle of distinction under international humanitarian law?
Yes, this is definitely a very important question in this regard, because under the principle of distinction, the parties to the armed conflict or the parties to the war are required to observe a clear distinction between the civilian population and civilian individuals, as well as civilian objects on the one hand and military objectives or military combatants on the other. So according to this principle of distinction, it is completely prohibited to target civilians, or I mean here the civilian population, and it is also a crime of war. It's a clear grave violation of the international humanitarian law, i.e. the 4 Geneva Conventions and the subsequent additional protocols to target civilians, or even the mere idea that conducting a military operation with the likelihood that the civilian population will be impacted or targeted or affected, this makes it unlawful and even prohibited, I mean, to carry out such an attack. Therefore, and in very clear terms, it is not allowed to carry out or to conduct a military operation if it is obvious that this attack will result in costing human lives, bringing about loss of civilian objects. And also in this regard, it is important to observe two important things. The first, it is important for the military personnel or the combatants to distinguish themselves when there is a state of war. So they need, for example, to wear a certain uniform. They need to exhibit certain distinctive emblems so that the other party or parties to the war will not confuse them with the civilian population. Furthermore, it is important not to place military objectives such as tanks or other forms of war machines in places that are populated by civilians. So this is on the part of both parties. Of course, in addition to the fact that the operation itself, the strike itself, cannot and must not target the civilian population. And when we pause here and reflect on the Islamic jurisprudence, we see this very striking convergence as when we look into, for instance, the primary source and the principal source of Islamic jurisprudence, i.e. the Noble Quran, we clearly see the prohibition as well of targeting innocence in general. So here the Quran even expands the concept of those who are not to be targeted by any military strike or operation, by making the focus on the idea of those who are innocents. So those, for example, when it comes to women, when it comes to children, when it comes to the old people or the senior citizens of any community, because they are innocent, they are not ones who are to be blamed for any act of war or any combative act. So the stress is clear in the Noble Quran when it comes to declaring any attempt to target such innocent people or such civilian totally prohibited and totally unjustifiable, as we read in the Noble Quran, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ قَاتَلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. For indeed, here the verse clearly states, and fight back against only those who fight against you, and do not transgress, and clearly targeting innocents or targeting civilians or even those who are no longer fighting, when it comes, for instance, to the injured, when it comes to the prisoners of war. Definitely they are not combatants, and therefore targeting them or exceeding the limit of targeting them constitutes an act of violation that is prohibited under the Islamic Sharia, under the Islamic jurisprudence. And we clearly see the very ending of this verse as it states, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. For indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love those who transgress or those who carry out acts of transgression. So here, as I said again, we clearly see this similarity between the understanding of recent international humanitarian law as well as the understanding within the Islamic jurisprudence.
Dear viewers, short break, and we'll be back to continue our discussion with our dear guest, Dr. Hossein Eldin Ali.
ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. And we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea, and provided for them of the good things, and preferred them over much of what we have created, with preference. The soul is an invaluable asset and has been honored by Islam, which has never humiliated it. Rather, it has cherished and upheld it so as to accomplish its mission in life. Property, which comes after the soul, is the essence of private and public life. No one can dispense without money to feed, dress, and sustain their children and to maintain their dignity. No nation can give up money if it wishes to protect its entity, manage its interests, and keep its sovereignty. Therefore, we have been ordered to acquire and develop money, and not to make it in the hands of the foolish, who do not spend it wisely or benefit from it. Given the special and general effects of money, its owner is asked by Islam to protect it from being extorted by usurpers through various means, including sacrificing his blood for it.
Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam.
Welcome back, dear viewers, and we will continue our discussions on relationship between international humanitarian law and Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh. Yes, Dr. Hussein.
Thank you to all our dear respected viewers.
Sir, what is meant by the principle of proportionality under international humanitarian law?
Yeah. Again, in very simple terms, these three principles together, the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, as well as the principle of precautions, they function together in order to constitute a tool that makes its best, let's put it this way, in order to ensure the minimization and the limiting of all the negative outcomes, consequences, repercussions, and ramifications of war. So in very clear and in very simple terms, under the principle of proportionality, it is totally prohibited to carry out attacks against military objectives if such attacks are likely to cause humanitarian loss, civilian injury, or damage to civilian objects that exceeds the anticipated military advantage. In other words, a military objective can only be attacked or constitute a legitimate target for a military operation if such attack or if this military objective will not be expected or it does not carry or hold the potential of causing an anticipated damage or injury to the potential accompanying human loss or suffering. So this is very briefly what the principle of proportionality entails. So again, and to highlight it in other terms, this proportionality needs to be observed, i.e., if the expected human suffering will be just anticipated to outweigh and to exceed the anticipated or expected military advantage, then such military strike or operation becomes prohibited under international humanitarian law. And this is why this proportionality needs to be observed under all circumstances and by all parties to the armed conflict.
Sir, what does the principle of precautions necessitate according to international humanitarian law?
The principle of precautions stands as the third principle of this framework of basic principles or foundational principles of international humanitarian law that are meant to minimize the human suffering and ensure still the dignity of all human beings, especially when it comes to the innocent people as well as the inviolable civilian objects. So in very simple terms, according to the principle of precautions, all the parties to the armed conflict need to exert their utmost to spare human life. Therefore, we have two aspects to highlight here when it comes to the principle of precautions. We have what can be referred to as the positive precautions, and that's ensuring that a military attack or strike will be cancelled if it is presumed that such military attack will bring about a human loss or a clear damage to the individual civilians, or even if it is merely a civilian object. On the other hand, also, in this regard, it is important to understand what can be referred to as the negative aspect of applying or implementing and observing the principle of precautions, and that's by taking all the necessary feasible steps to verify that all necessary measures are taken and observed to spare human lives and to protect the civilians, i.e. individual civilians, as well as the civilian objects. So all of these principles together, i.e. here the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, as well as the principle of precautions, they work together, they constitute a tool of international humanitarian law that aim to reduce human suffering, to counter the negative and the sad outcomes and effects of war, and ensure also in this regard that there is a potential with the last bullet shot for peace efforts to be undertaken and for peace building endeavors and measures and steps to be also effective and meaningful.
Finally, I'd like to thank my dear guest, Dr. Hussein Eddin Alem, lecturer of international humanitarian law. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
And by that, dear viewers, we come to the end of today's edition of our program. Peace be upon you. Thank you for watching.
Assalamualaikum wa alaikum salam.